my Democratic colleagues want to destroy this court. And if they get in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, virtually all of them has said they will expand the court from 9 to 13, or whatever number they want to pick, to dilute the conservative majority that's been formed over decades. Why? Because they want the court to be another extension of their liberal agenda. For decades, Democrats have enjoyed a court that would rule in their favor when they couldn't win at the ballot box, and that's come to an end. So their response is to destroy this court. What did the court do? It issued a decision regarding the status of the president, and it said the following: absolute immunity for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, such as pardons. When the Constitution confers an authority on the president specifically, they have absolute immunity. If that weren't the case, it would be chaos.
The Constitution does grant immunity, so the founders knew how to do that. They did not give immunity to presidents. The immunity granted in the Constitution was to legislators, to protect Congress against what the founders feared most: abuse of presidential power, like ordering false arrests to block our voting. Even then, legislative immunity accepted felony and treason. The Trump justices invented presidential immunity and then didn't even carve out treason. The first mention ever that a president can freely commit crimes comes from this court, just as we have our first ever criminal presidential candidate.
Are you still a Marxist?
Thank you for the question, Senator.
You don't have to thank me. We'll say you are welcome.
I am not, nor have ever been a Marxist.
Just to clarify the record, Judge Dubose, do you recall when that interview was done, the interview that Senator Kennedy referred to?
No, Senator, I don't. And if I recall, and I was brought to my attention yesterday, that was never an interview that I did that I thought was going to be published. I never reviewed it. It was an undergrad student who was interested in teaching, who spent 20 minutes.
What were you doing at the time?
I was teaching.
So this was before you even went to law school. This was
Yeah, I was
many years ago.
It was, Senator.
Perhaps during the time when my colleague Senator Kennedy was a Democrat.
If we go down this road, how much will your utility bill go up? How much gas prices will go up? We need to actually talk more honestly about that.
If we spend $50 trillion, or however much it takes, to make the United States carbon neutral by 2050, how much will it lower world temperatures?
Senator, that depends on the rest of the world.
Do you
to create harmonized incentives to reduce
Do you believe
emissions.
in the tooth fairy?
No, sir.
Do you believe in the Easter Bunny?
No, sir.
Do you believe that Jimmy Hoffa died of natural causes? No.
Deloitte predicts the differential between being responsible and reckless about climate could sum to more than $220 trillion globally between now and 2070. This is just the beginning. It will certainly get worse, much worse, particularly if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees. We are on a bad trajectory. It's time for us all to wake up and face the problem before coastal cities flood with water or Southwest cities can't get water. Alito came before this committee, and he had the chance to tell us that he thought Roe was egregiously wrong, make that observation about that case, and instead he hid that sentiment. He said instead,
Roe versus Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. It was decided in 1973, so it's been on the books for a long time. It has been challenged on a number of occasions, and I discussed those yesterday, and the Supreme Court has reaffirmed the decision. So looking back, he looks a lot like a sleeper agent predetermined to attack Roe, who wouldn't disclose what he was up to until he had the majority that he needed to change the legal standard and destroy the legal precedent.
Packing the court destroys the court.
Since 2020, We've seen proposals to resurrect the failed, misguided idea of court packing.
There has been considerable debate about the efforts of the radical left and the Democrat Party to pack the United States Supreme Court.
My sense is the court has already been packed. It has been packed as the result of a very long and expensive effort run by a handful of secretive right-wing billionaires through a bunch of front groups. The tally of the cost of the operation has risen from the original $250 million estimate of the Washington Post to now $580 million spent on trying to make sure that those billionaires succeeded in what has been characterized in this room as the long effort to make this a conservative court.
I met with Biden, President Biden, about 3 weeks ago when he came down to tour the damage, and I talked to him about the importance of getting FEMA fully funded. There's a federal disaster relief fund that's part of FEMA, and that pays for things like debris pickup, helps individuals that have lost their homes, helps our small businesses, a variety of things like that. Right now, this thing is getting low on funds. I checked on September 11th. It's down to $2.5 billion, and they project by the end of this month it'll be down to $550 million. What I'm asking for is a standalone vote on my bill, it's called the Federal Disaster Responsibility Act, and I hope every senator here will unanimously agree that we should do this.
May I say that I appreciate that Senator Scott would like to accelerate disaster aid to his home state, but let me observe that disasters have taken place not only in Florida, but in the presiding officer's home state of Hawaii, in Vermont, in New York, and Louisiana, and other states as well. And in response to that, what President Biden did was made a request of Congress in August to pass a comprehensive emergency supplemental that includes an increase in funding for FEMA's disaster relief fund. It also includes $45 million for the Department of Ag and $15 million for the Department of Interior to support more than 20,000 firefighters who are out there braving this explosion in new wildfires that are taking place across our country. And we absolutely need to head off the root cause of all of this, which is fossil fuel emissions, choking our atmosphere with greenhouse gases, heating up the earth, and causing us to spin out from basic conditions of habitability of the earth that have existed for tens of thousands of years.
The effort to delegitimize the Roberts course seems to be unending. The rhetoric around this has led to a man being arrested outside Justice Kavanaugh's home with guns and ties. A few days ago, there was an effort to stop a man who wanted to kill and torture 6 members of the court. Senator Schumer famously went to the court and threatened Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch before the Dobbs decision. So the American people, I hope you understand what's going on here. All of us, I think to a person, believe that what's going on against President Trump in New York and Georgia and other places is politically motivated legal garbage. That's what we think. We think Jack Smith's efforts are beyond the pale. They talk about insurrection, but he won't be charged with it. They've opened up Pandora's box. There'll be conservative prosecutors in states and counties probably taking up the challenge in the future, and that'll be bad for the presidency. What's going on here in America at this point in time, I think is bad for the presidency. Justice Roberts is probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. I think he's motivated by an allegiance to the law. He has a conservative bent, that's for darn sure, but that's okay. It's okay to have a liberal bent, as long as you're faithful to the law. I think he is. Matter of fact, I think he's one of the most decent people to have ever held the office of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. At his very core, he's a decent man. And what are you accusing him of? Basically, creating a monarchy in our country. That's just shameful.
There are several conclusions you can draw from this sorry episode. One is what laughably fake and disposable doctrines textualism and originalism are. Trump v. United States was manufactured out of thin air. Nothing textualist or originalist about it. Doctrines of convenience. Citizens United similarly had no originalist underpinnings. While we're at it, so much for case or controversy humility, or solving a split among the circuits. Instead, we get this grandiose partisan leap to a so-called decision for the ages. Trump just offered a $1 billion quid pro quo to his fossil fuel donors. Bribes of officials are usually for official acts. Now the acts can't even be used as evidence. Treason, too, is usually most dangerous from the inside. A treasonous president using his official powers, collaborating with crooked appointees in his administration, whom he can pardon, could sell America out to foreign enemies. Whatever deals or concessions Trump may obtain from Vladimir Putin to sell out our Ukrainian allies, he can walk away with scot-free. The timing smells too. The Colorado insurrection case needed a quick decision to help Trump, and Trump got a quick decision. Quick decisions can happen. United States versus Nixon took 3 weeks. Bush v. Gore took 4 days. What would help Trump in this case was delay, and he got delay. And then he got this decision, creating yet more delay. Had the court intended to shelter the Republican nominee from unpleasant accountability before the election for criminal acts, it could hardly have done better. He got a slow-mo Bush v. Gore. Remember how we got this. The billionaire's scheme to capture the court, spending over $500 million doing it. The billionaire's secret gifts program to keep justices happy, showering a particular justice with millions of dollars in gifts. The billionaire funded flotillas of amici providing directions. The absence, uniquely in government, of any ethics process, not even fact-finding. Creepy right-wing billionaires worked for years through phony front groups and mischievous minions like Leonard Leo to acquire the court that dark money built. The billionaires are reaping the rewards now of move after move towards oligarchy. Unlimited political money, secret political money, voter suppression, gerrymandering, squelched political corruption prosecutions, and now allowing a billionaire's stooge president to use his powers criminally with impunity to help the creepy billionaires. It is starting to look less and less like America. Thank you, Chairman. Almost exactly 5 years ago, I sent around this binder to all of my Senate colleagues, in which I compiled some of the most compelling warnings about the economic risks associated with climate change. Last week, I sent your staffs an updated version of the binder. Here it is. As you can see, the warnings keep piling up. Have fun with the light reading. Look at our national debt. One thing that stands out is how much of it was incurred as a result of exogenous shocks to the economy. Consider the 2008 financial crisis, which blew up the financial security of families and businesses across the country and reduced government revenues for a decade. Consider the pandemic. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the federal response to the pandemic, which brought COVID under control, protected families, and jump-started our economic recovery, will add $5.5 trillion to our deficits. Plenty of epidemiologists warned that the country was woefully unprepared for a pandemic. Now, we have all these warnings. Warnings of crashes in coastal property values as rising seas and more powerful storms hit the 30-year mortgage horizon. Warnings of insurance collapse from more frequent, intense, and unpredictable wildfires. A dangerous interplay between the insurance and mortgage markets hitting real estate markets across the country. Inflation from decreased agricultural yields, massive infrastructure demand, trouble in municipal bond markets, stranded assets, and a carbon bubble. The most dangerous risks are called systemic, meaning that they will cascade out into the broader economy as the mortgage problem did in 2008. And it's big. Some of the gravest dangers of climate change, which we could head off today, come to pass years or decades out. Rhode Island's coastline will be gone, reshaped into an archipelago by 2100, you say. Who cares? What's that? It's an eternity. Well, almost exactly a year ago, I became a grandfather for the first time. Baby Vera, God willing, will be alive in 2100. When I look at her, I'm looking at that future. Walk by any elementary school. The faces you see on the playground, God willing, will be alive in 2100. How will those little ones remember our less than greatest generation? We owe it to kids on playgrounds all across America to pay attention to get this right. By the end of this series of hearings, if we hear these expert witnesses, if we treat their testimony as our headlights, then our path, I hope, will be clear. Thank you, and let's get to work. One of the things I noticed about the Dobbs decision was that in order to get where the justices in favor of that decision wanted to go, they had to change the legal standard from a balancing of interests to history and tradition. In a balancing of interests, one of the interests is the interest of the woman involved in the procedure. In history and tradition, you go back to ancient history. Before women had rights, like the right to vote, like the right to have credit without the permission of their husband. It looked like the rights of women were being deliberately removed from the equation by the justices of the Supreme Court. And in that context, Ms. Zarowski, how did it feel to you? How did you feel that your rights, your interests were being considered as you went through the experience that you had to?
I felt I had absolutely no right to make a decision for my own body, for my own health, for the health of my child. I thought about when my grandfather was in the hospital, similarly also had sepsis, and my dad and his siblings were making the decision on how he should receive healthcare and what kind of treatment he should receive. And what I couldn't understand in those 3 days where I had to sit and wait to get healthcare is how is it that my dad was able to make healthcare decisions for his dad, but I couldn't make my own healthcare decisions for myself and for the child that was inside me. I had no right, I had no opportunity, and neither did my healthcare team.
In addition to changing the legal standard to get the result they wanted, the other thing that stuck out for me in that decision was Justice Alito's language that Roe versus Wade, and I'll quote him here, was egregiously wrong from the start. So presumably that means the start back in 1973. Well, after that start, while Roe was egregiously wrong, Alito came before this committee, and he had the chance to tell us that he thought Roe was egregiously wrong, make that observation about that case, and instead he hid that sentiment. He said instead, Roe versus Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. It was decided in 1973, so it has been on the books for a long time. It is a precedent that has been on the books for several decades. It has been challenged. It has been reaffirmed. No egregiously wrong, everything designed to reassure us that he was not going to overturn that decision. So looking back, he looks a lot like a sleeper agent predetermined to attack Roe, who wouldn't disclose what he was up to until he had the majority that he needed to change the legal standard and destroy the legal precedent. I think it's a very unfortunate episode in the Supreme Court's history. Let me start by pointing out that there are two sides to a judge's job. One is the judicial side, adjudicating matters, and the other is administrative side, which includes the ethics part of a judge's job. You have a clue which role the judge is playing if they're wearing a robe. If they're not, it's very likely the administrative side of their work. In the administrative side of their work, where the ethics questions are handled, those determinations go to the Judicial Conference. That's the same body I mentioned earlier that was established by Congress and that implements the financial disclosure laws passed by Congress and the recusal laws passed by Congress. It is made up essentially entirely of lower court judges. One justice sits on it as chair, the Chief Justice. And questions about financial disclosure of the justices are sent there now. We know that because we've seen it happen. In the first round of Harlan Crow to Clarence Thomas yacht and jet free travel disclosures, back in 2011, that was sent to the Judicial Conference and to its Financial Disclosure Committee. Its Financial Disclosure Committee is composed entirely of lower court judges, circuit chief judges and district chief judges. That is who resolved the matter of that first round of gifts from Harlan Crow to Clarence Thomas. And the second round, right now, that the Judicial Conference is reviewing, was again sent to the Financial Disclosure Committee, again made up entirely of lower court judges. So the objection that lower court judges would make a determination about whether justices have complied, for instance, with financial disclosure rules, that's the present state. That's the present state. And the other question that went before them recently was this question of Justice Scalia's maneuver, you want to call it that, of reading a personal invitation from a resort owner with whom he had no personal relationship as a matter of personal hospitality. When that question went back for determination, it went back to the Judicial Conference. And it was the Judicial Conference made up of lower court judges that said, no, that doesn't fly, that is not legal, that is not what the personal hospitality disclosure rule permits. I don't know if I'm holding up a vote at this point. No, not yet. Okay, we're still waiting for people to come back from the voting. So, you know, there are a lot of canards that are flying around in all of this. The canard that lower court judges can't make decisions about the administrative side, the ethics piece of Supreme Court justices' behavior is just simply belied by the fact that it has happened exactly that way over and over and over again, and without objection. Without objection. When Justice Thomas's first round of secret yacht and jet gifts from Harlan Crow was referred to the Financial Disclosure Committee, he did not say, wait a minute, you can't send that to that body. They're all lower court judges. He went along with it. And no Supreme Court justice has ever complained about lower court judges through the Judicial Conference exercising their judgment about administrative, financial, and ethics matters. So that just ain't so. And the argument that we are up against an attack on the independent judiciary and that this violates separation of powers, again, is belied by the acts of the justices themselves. The Judicial Conference has existed for decades. The court knows it exists because the Supreme Court Chief Justice chairs it. They have never objected to that being an intrusion into separation of powers because it was established by Congress. And the financial disclosure rules that Congress established. Again, when the matter about the first round of Harlan Crow to Justice Thomas secret yacht and jet travel gifts was sent to the Judicial Conference, nobody said you can't send it there because it violates separation of powers. They didn't say you can't do it because it's lower court judges, and they didn't say you can't do it because it's separation of powers. And that's because both of those arguments are completely false. There are ways to solve this problem that work squarely within the constitutional principle of separation of powers, a principle that I revere. As one of my Republican colleagues said today, there's also the question of checks and balances, and that we have to allow power to check power. Allowing Congress the power to check abuses in the judicial branch is a long established and proven fact that the Supreme Court has for decades gone along with without complaint, even when, and perhaps particularly when, it involved justices themselves. And indeed, after the Judicial Conference said, nope, you cannot fake personal hospitality if it's a corporate venue. You cannot fake personal hospitality just because it's a personal invitation. You cannot fake personal hospitality if there's not a real and long-standing personal relationship. When they said that, they were exercising powers given to them by Congress. And there was no objection to that from the Supreme Court. Indeed, Thomas put out a rare statement saying he would abide by that. He did not say that's unconstitutional. He did not say lower judges shouldn't do that. He did not say there's a separation of powers problem here. He said, yep, I will follow that new rule. This is driven by climate change. Let's be clear about that. We've had 14 named storms so far in the 2023 hurricane season. If you look back at last year, weather-related damage in the United States topped $165 billion. We've had testimony in my budget committee that in OMB, climate change will cost the federal budget $2 trillion per year. We cannot address this piecemeal, and we cannot address it only by providing disaster relief and not doing anything useful to head off these risks. Some of these are what economists call systemic risks. Systemic doesn't sound like it's a very big word, but what it means is the risk cascades out of the area where the economic harm is taking place to trash the whole economy. Just the way the 2008 mortgage meltdown didn't just trash the banks that had the bad mortgages, it took down the whole U.S. economy. That's predicted for coastal property value crash. That's predicted for a wildfire uninsurability crash. That's predicted for a carbon bubble crash. And the insurance meltdown has already begun in Florida, in Louisiana, and in Texas. So the warning signs of another 2008 scale financial crisis are already flashing red, and behind those immediate warning signs looms the collapse of Earth's basic natural operating systems that science has predicted for decades and with real precision. We need to do a lot more than just clean up. We do need to clean up the disasters, but we also need to get the pre-disaster preparation and resources in, because we know this is coming and we know it's getting worse, and we absolutely need to head off the root cause of all of this, which is fossil fuel emissions, choking our atmosphere with greenhouse gases, heating up the earth, and causing us to spin out from basic conditions of habitability of the earth that have existed for tens of thousands of years. So what we should do is pass the continuing resolution, with full funding for the President's supplemental request for FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, for the Department of Agriculture firefighter money, for the Department of Interior firefighter money. And while we're at it, because President Zelensky was here today, I'll also add that it's really important to continue to support Ukraine. So for those reasons, I will object.